The call came on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of my shift. I was elbow deep in a transmission rebuild at the shop when my phone buzzed against the tool cart. Unknown number, 503 area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Is this Nolan? The voice on the other end was thin, professional. Nolan Ashby? That's me. My name is Gerald Pruitt. I'm an estate attorney based in Tillamook, Oregon. I'm calling because you've been named as the sole beneficiary in the estate of your great-uncle, Theodore Ashby. I set down the wrench. My great-uncle, Ted. I hadn't heard that name in almost 8 years. The last time I saw him, I was 17, standing at my grandfather's funeral in a too-small suit while the rest of the family shot glances at each other across the casket. Ted had been the one who pressed a 20 into my palm and whispered, "Don't let them tell you who you are, son." Then he'd slipped out a side door before the burial was even finished. And that was it. Gone. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls. My father never talked about him. My aunt referred to him as that ghost on your grandfather's side whenever anyone made the mistake of asking. I drove up to Tillamook the following Friday. Mr. Pruitt's office was above a hardware store on Main Street, one of those spaces that felt like it hadn't been touched since 1987, with wood paneling and a globe on the corner of the desk that nobody ever spun. He slid a manila folder across to me and folded his hands on top of it. "Your great-uncle passed 6 weeks ago," he said. "Heart failure. He was 81. He paused. He had no spouse, no children, no close contact with the family as I understand it. "No," I said. "Not that I knew of. He left a property in the Coast Range. 14 acres, a main structure, and several outbuildings." He cleared his throat. "There are also outstanding property taxes, roughly $18,000 in arrears." I exhaled through my nose. 18,000. I had about 4,000 in my checking account and a truck with 140,000 miles on it. "What are my options?" I asked. "You could decline the inheritance entirely. Sign here and walk away clean." He tapped one corner of the folder. "Or you accept, settle the tax obligation, and take possession of the property." I stared at the folder. I thought about the 20 Ted had pressed into my palm. I thought about how he'd looked at me at that funeral. Not with pity, the way most adults looked at a teenager who'd just lost his grandfather, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. Like he was seeing something in me he remembered from a long time ago. "I'll take it," I said. I drove out to the property the next morning. The access road wasn't on Google Maps. I had the written directions Mr. Pruitt had given me, handwritten, actually, in the kind of precise cursive you don't see much anymore. And even with those, I missed the turnoff twice before I found the rusted mailbox half swallowed by salal bushes. The road after that was barely a road, more like a suggestion of a road. My truck scraped the low-hanging firs on both sides for a full quarter-mile before the trees opened up. The house was smaller than I'd expected. A cedar-shake cabin, really, set on a low rise above a creek you could hear but not quite see. The front porch had gone soft in one corner, and the paint, what was left of it, had given up fighting the Pacific moisture years ago. But the bones were solid. I could see that right away. The foundation was poured concrete, the roof was standing seam metal, and the windows were triple-paned, newer than the rest of the structure by at least 2 decades. I stepped inside. The air smelled like cedar and old paper, and something faintly chemical I couldn't place. Every wall was lined with bookshelves, not decorative bookshelves, working bookshelves, packed tight with technical manuals, survey maps, geological texts, 3 decades of Pacific Northwest almanacs. There was a wood stove in the corner and a workbench along the back wall, with tools hung above it on a pegboard, each one traced in black marker so you'd know exactly where to put it back. Precise, methodical, the kind of workspace where someone did serious things. I stood there for a long time just taking it in. I spent that first weekend doing a rough inventory. I wasn't planning to keep the property. I didn't see how I could, financially. But I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I made any decisions. The outbuildings were a woodshed, a small equipment garage with a vintage Bobcat inside that still ran, and a third structure set back from the others, newer than the rest. with a heavy steel door and a combination padlock I didn't have the code for. I came back to the main cabin on Sunday evening and sat at Ted's workbench eating a sandwich, looking out the window at the creek. There was a photograph tacked to the wall above the pegboard. Just one. Ted and my grandfather, younger than I'd ever seen either of them, standing on a dock somewhere with fish neither of them looked particularly proud of. They were laughing. My grandfather had the same laugh as my father. Same jaw, too. I don't know how long I sat there before I noticed the floor. It wasn't anything dramatic. I shifted my weight on the stool and the floorboard under my left foot moved. Not a creak, but an actual give, a slight depression that rebounded when I lifted my foot. I crouched down and pressed my palm flat against it. The boards around it were solid. This one had a little flex to it that the others didn't, a hollowness underneath. I found the seam after about 10 minutes of careful looking. It ran in a rectangle about 2 feet by 3, cut so precisely into the tongue and groove flooring that you'd never see it unless you were looking for it. And in one corner of that rectangle, set flush into the wood so it didn't catch on anything, a small recessed pull ring, brushed steel. I sat back on my heels and stared at it for a while. Then I pulled. The hatch lifted on gas springs, counterweighted so it came up easy despite its mass, which was substantial. Below it was a steel ladder bolted to a concrete shaft going down about 12 feet. A light came on automatically when the hatch opened. Motion sensor. I climbed down. The room at the bottom was roughly 10 by 12 feet, finished in plywood over what looked like poured concrete walls. It was climate-controlled. I could hear the hum of a small HVAC unit in the corner, and the air had that neutral, constant quality of a controlled environment. Filing cabinets lined one wall, 4 of them, full height. Along another wall, a workbench with a laptop, a satellite phone in a charging cradle, and a small safe bolted to the floor. On the workbench, weighted down by a river rock, was an envelope. My name on the front. Ted's handwriting. My hands were steady when I picked it up. I don't know why. Everything else about that moment was surreal and my hands were just steady. Nolan, if you're reading this, you made the right choice. I always thought you would. You were the only one in that family who ever looked at something broken and wondered how it worked instead of who to blame. What you'll find in these cabinets is the reason I've lived the way I have for the past 30 years. I need you to understand that before you open them, I didn't build this room out of paranoia. I built it out of obligation. The combination to the safe is your grandfather's birthday, month, day, year, 6 digits. Inside you'll find a drive and a set of documents. The drive goes to the FBI field office in Portland. There's a contact name. Special Agent Carla Odom. She's been waiting for this. She'll know what to do. The land is yours. Burn the cabin if you want to. But get the drive to Carla first. I'm sorry I wasn't around more. You deserved a better explanation than this. Teddy sat down on the concrete floor. I don't think I made a conscious decision to sit. My legs just stopped holding me up. I don't know how long I sat there before I opened the first filing cabinet. The folders were labeled in Ted's precise hand. Names, dates, coordinates. Ledgers printed on plain paper, columns of numbers, transaction codes, notations in a shorthand that took me a while to decipher. Wire transfers, property acquisitions, shell companies nested inside shell companies, each one pointing back to a name that appeared in the upper right corner of document after document. Coastal Meridian Group. I'd never heard of them. I Googled it on Ted's laptop. The satellite connection was still active, paid through an automated account, and found a legitimate-looking timber and real estate investment company based in Portland. 12 employees on LinkedIn. A website with a lot of photographs of Pacific Northwest scenery and not a lot of specific information about what they actually did. The documents in the cabinets told a different story. 3 decades of it. Coastal Meridian had been systematically acquiring land along the Oregon coast under fraudulent pretenses, filing falsified environmental impact assessments, bribing county commissioners, using shell entities to obscure the ownership chain. The properties they'd acquired held old-growth timber worth hundreds of millions. And buried underneath the financial documentation, cross-referenced and annotated in Ted's handwriting, was something else. evidence of at least 2 land disputes that had been resolved by the deaths of the previous owners. Ruled accidents, never investigated as anything else. One of those owners had been a woman named Shirley Greer. She died in a house fire in 1998. Her property, 82 acres of prime coastal forest, had transferred to a Coastal Meridian Shell Company within 4 months of her death. Ted had known Shirley Greer. I found the personal journal in the bottom drawer of the 4th cabinet. He'd been documenting this for 31 years. Every acquisition, every shell company, every commissioner who'd taken an envelope. He'd built his cabin in the Coast Range specifically to stay close enough to watch them, far enough that they didn't watch him. He'd fed information piecemeal to a journalist in 2009. The journalist had been pressured into killing the story. He'd approached a county DA's office in 2014. The DA had retired abruptly 3 months later. Agent Odom had been Ted's contact at the FBI for the past 9 years. The case was real. The case was built. What it had needed was a complete package of documentation, the kind that couldn't be challenged or suppressed by a single phone call to the right person, and Ted had spent 3 decades making that package bulletproof. He just needed someone he trusted to get it across the finish line. I closed the journal. I sat for a long time in that quiet room underground, with the HVAC humming and the smell of old paper, and the weight of 31 years pressing down on me from every wall. Then I heard footsteps on the floor above my head. I killed the light before I was fully aware of making the decision. Old reflex from somewhere, some animal part of the brain that acts before the thinking part catches up. I stood perfectly still in the dark and listened. 2 sets of footsteps, moving through the cabin slowly, methodically, opening drawers. A beam of light came down through the gaps in the floorboards. A voice, low, "He hasn't been here long. Look at this, groceries still on the counter." Another voice, which I placed immediately as belonging to someone older, used to giving direction, "Check the perimeter." I didn't breathe. The footsteps moved to the edge of the room and stopped almost directly above the hatch. The floorboard dipped slightly under the weight. I stared upward in the dark, watching the thin lines of light between the boards. They stayed there for what felt like 3 full minutes. Then they moved on. I waited another 20 minutes after the last sound before I climbed back up. They'd gone through everything: the bookshelves, the workbench, the kitchen. The photograph of Ted and my grandfather had been pulled off the wall and left on the floor face down. I don't know why that was the thing that made my hands go cold. I needed to move fast. I went back down to the room, opened the safe, took the drive and the documents. I photographed every file cabinet with my phone. All 4 cabinets, every folder, both sides of every page. If something happened to the original documents, the photographs would exist somewhere. I uploaded them to 3 different cloud accounts before I left the property. Then I hit a problem. My truck had a flat, clean puncture through the sidewall, not a road hazard. Too deliberate, too centered. They'd done it while I was underground. I was 14 miles from pavement, on a road that wouldn't accommodate a tow truck. I had the satellite phone. I went back for it, took it outside, powered it up. Called the number Ted had left for Agent Odom directly. She answered on the 2nd ring. "This is Nolan Ashby," I said. "I'm Theodore Ashby's great-nephew. I'm at his property in the Coast Range. I have the documentation he built for you. And I need to tell you that 2 people were here about an hour ago going through the cabin, and they've immobilized my vehicle." There was a brief silence. When she spoke, her voice was very calm, very precise. "Don't leave the property. Lock yourself into whatever the most defensible space is. I'm dispatching a field team to your location right now. Can you give me your GPS coordinates?" I read them off Ted's handwritten sheet. 45 minutes, she said. "Stay on this line with me." I went back into the cabin. I locked the door and pulled the workbench across it, not because it would stop anyone who meant business, but because it would slow them down enough to matter. Then I sat in Ted's chair with the satellite phone against my ear and waited. Agent Odom talked me through it, not in a rehearsed, crisis hotline way, in the way of someone who had been working this case for 9 years and knew exactly what the stakes were, and didn't pretend otherwise. She told me what Coastal Meridian had done. She told me about Shirley Greer. She confirmed everything Ted's documents said and added things he hadn't known. He was our most important asset, she said. He just wouldn't let us move until he was certain we couldn't lose. He was protecting the integrity of the case. He was protecting the people who might testify, I said. He was protecting anyone connected to it. He thought if they moved too early, Coastal Meridian would find a way to suppress it. Yes, she said. He was right about that. The field team arrived in 41 minutes. 3 vehicles, one of them an evidence van. They swept the property and found a sedan parked off the access road about a half-mile back, empty, plates coming back to a dummy LLC registered in Nevada. They took the filing cabinets, the laptop, the safe's contents, Ted's journal. They gave me receipts for everything. Agent Odom came herself. I hadn't expected that. She was small, probably mid-50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had been patient for a very long time and was now very close to the end of that patience. She shook my hand and held it for a second before she let go. "Your uncle talked about you," she said. "More than you probably realize." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. What followed happened over the next 8 months, mostly without me, which was fine. The documentation Ted had built was, as Agent Odom had described it to her superiors in her initial briefing, essentially trial-ready. The lead attorney for Coastal Meridian was arrested in October. 4 county commissioners were indicted in November. The timber assets, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of old-growth Pacific Northwest forest, were frozen pending adjudication, with the expectation that they'd ultimately be transferred to a conservation trust. Shirley Greer's family was notified that the investigation into her death had been reopened. My father called me in December. He'd seen something on the news, a brief mention of a Coast Range property connected to the investigation, and put it together. "Ted left you the cabin," he said. It wasn't a question. He did. There was a long silence. My father was not a man who handled silence poorly, but this one was different. "He told me once," my father finally said, "that you reminded him of your grandfather. When your grandfather was young, I mean. Before things got complicated." "What did he mean by that?" Another pause. "He meant you were the kind of person who doesn't ask for anything afterward." I'm still not sure that's true. But I've thought about it a lot since. The cabin is mine now. I drove up last spring after the case was settled and spent 2 weeks patching the porch, repainting the trim, clearing the access road properly. The room under the floor is empty. I leave the hatch open now. There's nothing down there that needs hiding. In the evenings I sit on the porch and listen to the creek, and sometimes I take down that photograph. They gave it back to me, Ted's effects, what little there was, and look at the 2 of them on the dock. My grandfather's laugh, Ted's face, looking slightly sideways at the camera, like he was already thinking about something else. He spent 31 years doing something that cost him everything most people want: family, proximity, ease. He did it because a woman named Shirley Greer died in a fire, and nobody was going to answer for it unless someone made sure they had to. He didn't ask me to finish what he started. He just left me a letter and a locked room and trusted me to be the kind of person who would open the door. I think about that more than anything else.